Timeline: a look into the long history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The early 1900s, British promote Zionist movement for a national home for Jewish populations. The Balfour Declaration, issued by the British government in 1917, announced Britain's promise for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which was then under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. How was modern Israel created in Palestine? Know all about the conflict. What is the genesis of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and how was modern Israel created? What is the role of Hamas and who backs it? How has Israel's relationship with Arab countries evolved over the decades? An explainer that is all that you need to know. The Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most complex disputes in modern history, rooted in a deep-seated historical, religious, and political context. The conflict revolves around competing claims to territory and national identity, primarily involving Israel and the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The conflict has resulted in numerous wars and cycles of violence. How Israel was established. Palestine was under Ottoman rule for over 400 years, from the early 16th century until the end of World War I. After World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate over Palestine in 1920. The Zionist movement, which emerged in the late 19th century, aimed at establishing a national homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine, where a small number of Jews resided. It was also a response to the widespread persecution and anti-Semitism that Jews faced in Europe and Russia. The British government's Balfour Declaration of 1917 supported the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This declaration laid the foundation for the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, proclaimed the establishment of Israel in accordance with the UN Plan of Partition of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The declaration of the State of Israel was followed by a war with neighboring Arab states and the creation of Israel. But how did Jews come to populate Israel? The Holocaust during World War II led to a massive displacement of Jewish survivors who sought refuge elsewhere. In 1950, Israel enacted the Law of Return, which grants the right of immigration to Jews from around the world to Israel. Various operations were conducted by the Israeli government to airlift Jews facing persecution to Israel. What are West Bank and Gaza? The establishment of Israel displaced thousands of people and became the source of the festering Israel-Palestine conflict. At the heart of the conflict is the competing territorial claims by Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. Israel controls much of historic Palestine, while the Palestinian Authority administers parts of the West Bank, the bigger of two-part Palestinian territories. The West Bank, an area of 5,655 square kilometers, is home to a diverse population, including Palestinians, Jewish settlers, and a small number of other groups. The West Bank was under Jordan's control and Israel captured it after the 1967 Six-Day War. It then constructed numerous settlements. Parts of the West Bank are governed by the Palestinian Authority, an interim self-governing body established as a result of the Oslo Accords signed between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, in 1993. The other part of the Palestinian territory is known as Gaza or Gaza Strip, and is wedged between Israel and Egypt. After the establishment of Israel in 1948, Gaza was controlled for 2 decades by Egypt. It came under Israel's control after the Six-Day War in 1967. In August 2005, Israel withdrew its forces from the Gaza Strip, abandoning settlements and leaving the enclave under the control of the Palestinian Authority. Hamas won the 2006 election against Fatah in Gaza and came to control the territory in 2007 after clashes. The Gaza Strip is a 363 square km densely populated area, inhabited by over 2 million people. There has been no election since 2006. What are Hamas, Fatah, and Hezbollah? Hamas is one of the 2 main political parties in the Palestinian territories, the other being Fatah. Hamas has been designated a terrorist organization by several countries, including the United States. Hamas is said to receive funding and arms support from Iran. Hamas doesn't recognize Israel and claims to be a movement to free Palestinians from Israeli occupation. It is currently being led by Ismail Haniyeh and has been behind attacks on Israel. Fatah, whose full name is the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, was founded in 1959 by Yasser Arafat, Khalil al-Wazir, Abu Jihad, and other Palestinian leaders. It officially recognized Israel and entered into negotiations with it in the early 1990s, leading to the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993. Fatah was involved in armed struggle and guerrilla warfare against Israeli forces in the 1960s and 1970s, including the high-profile 1972 Munich Olympics attack. But over time, Fatah shifted its focus toward diplomacy and negotiations with Israel to achieve Palestinian statehood. Hezbollah is a Shia Islamist militant and political organization based in Lebanon. Hezbollah supports Palestinian terrorist groups and has been involved in multiple conflicts with Israel. Like Hamas, Hezbollah is also backed by Iran. Hezbollah is a heavily armed militant group and tries to counter Western influence in the Middle East. In collusion with Russia, it supported the Bashar al-Assad regime in neighboring Syria. Significance of Al-Aqsa Mosque and Jerusalem. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered the third holiest site in Islam. It is located in the Old City of Jerusalem, within the larger compound known as the Al-Haram al-Sharif or the Noble Sanctuary, which is also referred to as the Temple Mount in Judaism. Jews from across the world come to pray at the compound's western wall. The Temple Mount is also a significant religious site for Christians as it is said to be associated with key events in the life of Jesus Christ. Following the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel gained control of East Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The Al-Aqsa Mosque has been a symbol of resistance and national identity for Palestinians, and several political movements have used it as a rallying point against Israeli occupation. The status of Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque has been one of the most contentious issues in peace negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, and both parties lay claim to Jerusalem as their capital. Israel passed a law in 1980 and declared Jerusalem, complete and united, is the capital of Israel. In 2017, then U.S. President Donald Trump decided to shift the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Most countries still have their diplomatic missions in Tel Aviv. The October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel has a connection with the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was supposed to be a payback for an Israeli raid on the mosque in May 2021, according to a Reuters report. The connection was made clear by Hamas leader Mohammed Deif when he called the strike on Israel Al-Aqsa flood. Israel has been involved in 4 major wars with its Arab neighbors. Its declaration of independence sparked the 1948 Arab-Israeli War with Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, which opposed Israel's creation. The war resulted in Israel's establishment and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Then in 1965, Israel attacked Egypt after it nationalized the Suez Canal. Israel won a swift and decisive victory against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in the Six-Day War of 1967. Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel in 1973 on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. Israel repelled the attacks, but the war resulted in significant casualties and territorial adjustments. The Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt in 1982 under the terms of the peace treaty signed in 1979 with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Israel also fought 2 wars with Lebanon. One in 1982 was over the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, and the other in 2006 over Hezbollah. Other than that, Iran has been engaged in a proxy war with Israel by funding Hamas and Hezbollah. Israel has managed to establish cold peace after signing treaties with Egypt and Jordan. Israel has been involved in 4 major wars with its Arab neighbors. Its declaration of independence sparked the 1948 Arab-Israeli War with Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, which opposed Israel's creation. The war resulted in Israel's establishment and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Then in 1965, Israel attacked Egypt after it nationalized the Suez Canal. Israel won a swift and decisive victory against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria in the Six-Day War of 1967. Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel in 1973 on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. Israel repelled the attacks, but the war resulted in significant casualties and territorial adjustments. The Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt in 1982 under the terms of the peace treaty signed in 1979 with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. Israel also fought two wars with Lebanon. One in 1982 was over the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO), and the other in 2006 over Hezbollah. Other than that, Iran has been engaged in a proxy war with Israel by funding Hamas and Hezbollah. Israel has managed to establish cold peace after signing treaties with Egypt and Jordan. The first years-long uprising from Palestinian forces in their struggle for self-determination began in 1987. It ended in 1993, when Israel's then Prime Minister of Israel Yitzhak Rabin, and then leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO), Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, which declared the PLO as a representative for the Palestinian people and recognized Israel's right to exist in peace, according to the United States Department of State. A second intifada, 2000, from Palestinian forces, which ended in 2005, led to the Palestinian people's autonomous control of the West Bank and Gaza. In 2005, Israel disengaged from the Gaza Strip, uprooting its settlements in the region. The following year, Hamas won an election to control the Gaza Strip, kicking out representatives of the PLO. The armed takeover of Gaza by Hamas in 2007 prompted Israel to impose a blockade on Gaza. Israel imposes blockade. Following the armed takeover, the surrounding countries of Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on the Gaza Strip which greatly restricts the movement of people and goods into and out of the area. These restrictions have been a concern of humanitarian groups around the world about the conditions in which Palestinians are forced to live. According to the European Commission, Palestinians are denied adequate housing, access to services while subjected to forced evictions and movement restrictions. In Gaza, recurrent cycles of hostilities, greater divisions, and a blockade have considerably worsened people's living conditions, the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations states on its website. According to the United Nations, 81% of the population in Gaza lives in poverty, with food insecurity plaguing 63% of Gaza citizens. The unemployment rate is 46.6%, and access to clean water and electricity remains inaccessible at crisis levels, the agency states. In the years following, Hamas and Israel continued to engage in combat. Roughly 6,400 Palestinians and 300 Israelis had been killed in the ongoing violence since 2008, not counting the recent fatalities, the UN reported. Hamas launched missile attacks on Israel, and Israel fired massive strikes in retaliation. Israel engaged in major, large-scale military operations including the 22-day-long 2008 Operation Cast Lead, the 2012 Pillar of Defense 8-day operation, and the Protective Edge operation in 2014. 2023, the incursion against Israel by terrorist group Hamas. At least 1,400 people have died and 3,400 others have been injured in Israel after the terrorist militant group Hamas launched an incursion on Saturday, Israeli authorities said. Hamas fired thousands of rockets toward Israel and an estimated 1,000 fighters crossed into the country from the neighboring Gaza Strip. Israeli officials said at least 130 civilians and soldiers have been taken hostage. Israeli forces have responded, declaring a state of alert for war and launching hundreds of retaliatory airstrikes on Gaza. Palestinian authorities said at least 2,750 have died and another 9,700 have been injured in Gaza by the Israeli response. In the wake of the Hamas attack this weekend, Israeli defense officials said the flow of all food and power to Gaza was being cut off in preparation for a total siege. The attacks have launched renewed attention on the region's conflict, prompting protests around the world. Around 6:30 a.m. Israel summertime on October 7, 2023, Hamas announced the start of what it called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, stating that it had fired over 5,000 rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel within a span of 20 minutes. Israeli sources reported that at least 3,000 projectiles had been launched from Gaza. At least 5 people were killed by the rocket attacks. Explosions were reported in areas surrounding the Strip and in cities in the Sharon Plain including Gedera, Herzliya, Tel Aviv, and Ashkelon. Air raid sirens were also activated in Beersheba, Jerusalem, Rehovot, Rishon LeZion, and Palmachim Air Base. Hamas issued a call to arms, with senior military commander Mohammed Deif calling on Muslims everywhere to launch an attack. Palestinian militants also opened fire on Israeli boats off the Gaza Strip, while clashes broke out between Palestinians and the Israel Defense Forces in the eastern section of the Gaza perimeter fence. In the evening, Hamas launched another barrage of about 150 rockets towards Israel, with explosions being reported in Jabna, Givatayim, Bat Yam, Beit Dagon, Tel Aviv, and Rishon LeZion. Supernova Sukkot Gathering was a weekend-long outdoor trance music festival that began on October 6, 2023. It took place in the western Negev Desert, approximately 5 kilometers (3.1 miles) from the Gaza-Israel barrier, near the Ri'an kibbutz. Produced by an organizer called Nova, also referred to as Tribe of Nova, it was the Israeli edition, pre-festival event, of Universo Paralelo, a psy-trance festival started 23 years ago in Bahia, Brazil. The organizers switched to the site only 2 days before, after the original location in southern Israel did not work out. Scheduled to coincide with the Jewish festival of Simchat Torah, the rave was billed as a celebration of friends, love and infinite freedom. The festival site had 3 stages, a camping zone, and an area with a bar and food. Attendees described the crowd as mostly consisting of Israelis of ages 20 to 40 from across the country. Attendance was reported to be 3,500, but figures vary. Security guards and police were present at the festival. Hamas Assault. The musical festival was one of the first targets of Hamas' surprise attack against Israel in the early morning hours of October 7, 2023. It is not known whether Hamas knew beforehand that the festival was taking place there or whether they heard the music and came across it by chance. One attendee stated that after cutting the electricity, a group of approximately 50 Hamas gunmen arrived in vans and sprayed gunfire in all directions. Some of the Hamas gunmen who attacked the festival infiltrated Israel via motorized paragliders, arriving around 6:30 a.m. As festival attendees fled in panic, jeeps filled with gunmen began firing at the escaping cars. Gunmen also blockaded roads. The open terrain left few places to hide. Many attendees who hid in the trees were murdered as militants methodically shot them. Others who hid in bushes and orchards managed to survive. The massacre took place amid a rocket siren, signaling a barrage of rockets fired into Israel. Independently verified drone footage of the site showed dozens of scorched, burnt cars and skid marks. Footage of the attack, posted on a Telegram channel, included graphic depictions of murder and hostage-taking. The Hamas militants kidnapped an unknown number of participants. Videos on social media showed them being seized. The abducted concertgoers were taken to Gaza, where some were filmed in Hamas propaganda videos. Relatives and friends of the missing searched for information about the missing. Those apparently abducted by Hamas included Shani Luke, a 22-year-old German-Israeli dual citizen, a British man, and a 25-year-old Chinese-Israeli woman. 3 dual Brazilian-Israeli nationals who had attended the festival were also missing. Witnesses have reported that some of the captured women have been raped. The Israel Defense Forces have not verified the claims. Testimonies were also provided by eyewitnesses who survived the massacre. We have reached the end of this video. If you liked it, help us with a like, share it, and subscribe. Thank you.